the humble girl who takes in a drunk man, not knowing he's an abandoned millionaire who... If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. Emily tightened her coat against her body as she hurried through the empty streets of downtown. The cold July wind cut across her face, but she was already accustomed to this route after the night shift at the 24-hour bakery. Her thoughts wandered between the month's bills, the late payment for nursing school tuition, and her younger brother's medications that needed to be purchased the following week. Since Grandma Martha took on raising the two of them, life had never been easy. Now at 23, Emily carried on her shoulders the responsibility of maintaining the household and caring for her brother, who at 16 was facing an autoimmune condition requiring constant treatment. Between double shifts at the bakery and evening classes at nursing school, she found energy in the hope that one day she could work as a nurse and offer a better life for her small family. While crossing Main Street, something caught her attention. A man was sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against a closed storefront with his head down between his knees. He wore what appeared to be an expensive suit, though all wrinkled, and was holding a bouquet of wilted roses. Emily hesitated. At that hour of the morning, approaching a stranger could be dangerous. But there was something different about that scene. The man was sobbing quietly, a restrained cry that revealed more than simple drunkenness. It was the sound of someone completely devastated. Emily thought of her grandmother, who always said that kindness generates kindness. She took a deep breath and approached cautiously. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?" The man slowly raised his face. He appeared to be about 35 years old, and his red, swollen eyes revealed that he had been crying for hours. He tried to stand up, staggering, but his legs weakened. Emily instinctively supported him. I don't know where I am," he mumbled, his voice hoarse and broken. "I lost everything. Emily took from her bag a water bottle that she always carried to work and offered it to him. The man drank in small sips, his hands trembling slightly. Meanwhile, she observed his features more carefully. There was something vaguely familiar about him, as if she had seen him somewhere before. "Can I call someone for you? Family, friends?" He shook his head negatively, a bitter smile forming on his lips. "I don't have anyone, not anymore." Emily looked at her watch. It was already past 3 in the morning, and she needed to wake up at 6 to prepare breakfast for Jake before school. But something in her heart wouldn't let her abandon that man there in that state. "I'm going to call a car to take you to a hotel, okay? There must be one with vacancies nearby." She opened the app on her cell phone, aware that this ride would consume the last money she had in her account until the next payment. The man tried to protest weakly, but Emily had already confirmed the trip. "You don't need to worry about paying me back. Sometimes we all need a helping hand," she said, helping him get up when the car arrived. She quickly wrote a note on a piece of paper from the notepad she used to take orders at the bakery. "Hope tomorrow is a better day. Stay strong." As the car drove away, Emily resumed her walk home, now longer without money for transportation. She didn't imagine that that small gesture of kindness would forever change the course of her life, nor that the man she had just helped was Matthew Anderson, the famous businessman who hours earlier had been the protagonist of the biggest scandal in Chicago's high society. Matthew Anderson woke up with a throbbing headache in the simple hotel room. For a moment he was disoriented, until memories of the previous night began to return like painful flashbacks. The altar decorated with expensive flowers, hundreds of guests waiting, cameras everywhere broadcasting live what would be the wedding of the year. And then the moment when everything collapsed. It had been an uncontrollable impulse, years maintaining appearances, following the perfect script that others had written for his life. He had built an empire in the financial market, was on the cover of business magazines, an example of success. The marriage to Victoria Rothschild would be the icing on the cake, the union of two of the country's most influential families. But upon seeing Victoria walking down the church aisle, radiant in her $500,000 dress, something inside him exploded. The words came out before he could contain them. "I can't do this," his voice echoed through the microphone. "All of this is a sham. Every smile, every photo, every headline. We're just pieces in a game of interests. There's no love here, there never was. The silence that followed was deafening. The camera flashes intensified, capturing every second of his public collapse. Victoria, perfectly trained for crisis situations, kept her smile frozen while tears ran down her made-up face. Matthew threw the phone on the hotel bed. Notifications kept coming in. The video of his speech already had millions of views. Comments on social media ranged from ridicule to conspiracy theories about his mental state. Some speculated about drug use, others about a supposed secret affair. That's when he noticed the small folded paper on the nightstand. The handwriting was delicate but firm. "Hope tomorrow is a better day. Stay strong." He then remembered the young woman from the night before. In the midst of his most vulnerable moment, a complete stranger had extended her hand without asking for anything in return. He sat on the bed, running his fingers through his disheveled hair. For the first time in years, he didn't have a schedule. Packed with commitments, didn't need to keep up appearances, didn't have to follow anyone's script. It was scary and, at the same time, strangely liberating. He got up and went to the window. The hotel was in a simple area of the city, quite different from the places he usually frequented. On the street, ordinary people were starting their daily routine. An old lady was sweeping the sidewalk in front of her store. A delivery person was pedaling hurriedly. Students were waiting for the bus at the corner. Matthew picked up the note left by the young woman again. He couldn't quite remember her face. The previous night was a confused blur in his mind. But he remembered her gentle voice, the gesture of offering water, the genuine concern in her eyes. He made a decision. He wouldn't return to his penthouse in River North, wouldn't respond to the hundreds of messages on his cell phone, wouldn't provide explanations to the press. He needed to understand who he was when he removed all social masks, all titles, all money. And for some reason he didn't yet fully understand. He felt he needed to find that young woman again. He took a long shower, put on the same clothes. From the night before, he had no other options, and went down for breakfast in the small hotel restaurant. While observing the street movement through the window, he began to devise a plan. He knew he would be easily recognized if he walked around the city as himself. But what if he created a new temporary identity? Someone ordinary, without the weight of the Anderson surname, without all the baggage of expectations and judgments. Emily arrived home exhausted after the long walk. The small apartment on the third floor was quiet, but a soft light coming from the kitchen revealed that she wasn't the only one awake. She found Grandma Martha preparing tea, as she always did when insomnia hit. "You're late today, my dear," commented the old lady, placing another cup on the table. The comforting aroma of chamomile filled the environment. "I had to help someone." "On the street, Grandma," Emily replied, sitting down and accepting the offered tea. "I spent my transportation money, but I couldn't leave the man there in that state." Martha smiled, her tired eyes shining with pride. "You have a heart just like your father's. He also couldn't see anyone in need without doing something." Emily sipped her tea, thoughtful. She barely remembered her father, who passed away when she was only 5 years old. Jake never even got to know him, but the stories that her grandmother told kept his memory alive, especially those about his dedication as a nurse and his desire to make a difference in people's lives. "How's Jake?" she asked, changing the subject. "He had a bit of a fever earlier, but it's gone now. He's sleeping now," Martha replied, her expression softening when speaking about her younger grandson. "Emily, you can't continue at this pace. Working overnight, school, taking care of the house, and it's too much weight to carry alone." "And what's the alternative, Grandma? Jake's medicines are expensive. School is too. If I give up now..." "Nobody's talking about giving up," Martha gently interrupted her. "But maybe we can find a less burdensome path. Have you thought about looking for a scholarship or trying a paid internship in the field?" Emily sighed. She had already tried all these alternatives. Scholarships were highly competitive, and internships paid less than her job at the bakery. Besides, she needed a flexible schedule to be able to accompany Jake to medical appointments. The soft sound of footsteps interrupted the conversation. Jake appeared at the kitchen door, his face still marked by sleep. At 16, he was tall and thin with the same expressive eyes as his sister. "I can't sleep," he murmured, sitting with them at the table. "And you're coming home late again." Emily extended her hand, affectionately messing up her brother's hair. "I just had an unexpected situation today. How are you feeling?" "Better," he answered, but his tone didn't convince anyone. "Hey, did you see that mess with the businessman's wedding? It's everywhere. The guy just freaked out at the altar, said it was all a lie, and disappeared." Emily frowned, a flash of recognition passing through her mind. Could it be? No, it would be too much of a coincidence. She took her phone and quickly searched for news about the event. Her heart raced when she saw the photos. The man she had helped a few hours before was Matthew Anderson, the billionaire who had abandoned his own wedding. "My God," she whispered, catching the attention of her grandmother and brother. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, curious. Emily hesitated for a moment before telling them about her encounter during the early morning. As she narrated the events, she saw her brother's eyes widen in surprise and admiration. "You helped Matthew Anderson?" "The Matthew Anderson?" Jake repeated, incredulous. This is amazing. You have to tell the press, it'll become news." "No," Emily responded firmly. "I'm not going to expose someone who was in a vulnerable moment. He doesn't need more people exploiting his suffering." Martha smiled, proud of her granddaughter. "That's how it's done, my child. True kindness doesn't ask for spotlights." Emily finished her tea, feeling the tiredness weigh even more on her shoulders. That story would certainly yield sensationalist headlines, but she wouldn't be part of it. The gesture of help had been genuine, without ulterior motives, and so it would remain. A week passed since the night of the unexpected encounter. Emily continued her routine at the 24-hour bakery, balancing trays of fresh bread and serving coffee to night customers. The movement was quiet that Tuesday, allowing her to get ahead on reading an anatomy text for her school exam. "Emily, there's a new customer at table 5, warned Mrs. Betty, the cook who had been working there for more than 2 decades. "It's the 3rd time he's come this week, always during your shift." Emily looked up from her book, curious. At the indicated table, a man of about 35 was reading a newspaper. He wore thick-framed glasses, a discreet cap, and simple clothes, jeans, a white t-shirt and a grey sweatshirt. There was something familiar about his profile, but she couldn't pinpoint what. "I'll attend to him," she said, storing the book under the counter. She approached the table with her order pad. The man lowered the newspaper, revealing a gentle smile. His eyes behind the lenses of the glasses seemed to study her with intensity. "Good evening," she greeted. "What would you like?" "A coffee with milk and toast, please," he ordered, his voice modulated in a calm tone. "Do you always work at this hour?" The question, although casual, made Emily slightly alert. Years of night work had taught her to be cautious with very curious customers. "The schedules vary," she replied diplomatically, noting the order. "Anything else?" "Actually, yes." He hesitated for a moment. "You're a nursing student, aren't you? I saw your anatomy book." Emily nodded, surprised by the observation. The man continued, "You know, I have a lot of interest in the health area. I've always wanted to understand more about the work of professionals who care for people." Something in the way he spoke conveyed sincerity. Emily relaxed a bit, allowing herself to engage in conversation while waiting for the order to be ready. "It's a challenging profession, but very rewarding," she commented. "Do you work in the field?" "Not exactly," he replied, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "Let's say I'm in a moment of professional rediscovery." The order was ready and Emily served it. During the rest of her shift, she discreetly observed the mysterious customer. He remained for almost 2 hours, alternating between reading the newspaper and making notes in a small notebook. Occasionally their gazes would cross, and he would always offer a polite smile. When he got up to pay the bill, he left a generous tip and a folded note with the money. "Thank you for your attention. Your dedication to your studies is admirable." The next morning, during the family breakfast, Jake noticed his sister was pensive. "Did something happen at work?" he asked, while taking his medications. Emily told him about the mysterious customer, his curiosity about her studies and the note. Jake listened attentively, a gleam of recognition passing through his eyes, but he remained silent. "Maybe he's just looking for company," suggested Martha, serving more coffee. "The early morning can be very lonely." Emily agreed, but couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to that story. The man seemed too familiar, as if she already knew him from somewhere. But where? Her mind went back to the night she helped Matthew Anderson, but she quickly dismissed the idea. It would be too much of a coincidence. What she didn't know was that Jake, upon seeing a photo of the businessman on his phone that morning, had immediately recognized the mysterious customer from the bakery. But he decided to keep that information to himself, intuiting that there was a greater reason behind that disguise. The mysterious customer's visits to the bakery became increasingly frequent over the following weeks. Matthew, introducing himself only as Andrew, found in the quiet early mornings the perfect refuge for his personal transformation. With each conversation with Emily, he discovered a new perspective on life, so different from the artificial world he had lived in until then. On a particularly quiet night, while few customers occupied the tables, Emily confided her concerns about the late tuition payment. 3 months late, she sighed, serving more coffee to Andrew. "If I can't reach an agreement by next week, I'll have to suspend my courses." Matthew felt a tightness in his chest. There he was, with millions in his bank accounts, hearing someone so dedicated needing to abandon their dreams due to financial issues. "Isn't there any possibility of a scholarship or some financing program?" he asked, trying to maintain a casual tone. "I've tried everything," Emily answered, a tired smile on her lips, "but with the expenses of my brother's treatment, it becomes impossible to take on more debt. You know, what's most ironic? Just yesterday, I attended an emergency here at the bakery. An elderly man felt unwell, high blood pressure. I managed to help because I remember the first aid classes. It's frustrating to know that I have a vocation for this, but..." She interrupted the sentence upon seeing new customers entering. Matthew observed as she walked away, efficient and professional, without letting her personal concerns show through. That ability to stay strong in the face of adversity impressed him more and more. The next day, Emily was called to the college secretary's office. To her surprise, they informed her that her late payments had been settled by an anonymous donor, who had also left the next semester paid in advance. "There must be some mistake," she insisted, incredulous. "There's no mistake, Miss Parker," assured the secretary, showing the receipts. "The donor requested anonymity, but left a message. Continue being a light in others' lives." Emily sat on the college steps, trying to process what had happened. Who could have done that? Her thought flew to Andrew, the mysterious customer, but she dismissed the idea. He seemed to be an ordinary person, like her. That night, when she arrived home, she found Jake watching a report about Matthew Anderson. The businessman had completely disappeared from the spotlight since the wedding incident, generating speculation about his whereabouts. "They say he had a nervous breakdown," commented Jake, carefully observing his sister's reaction. "But I think he was just tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't." Emily sat next to her brother, her eyes fixed on Matthew's photo on television. There was something familiar about that face, something that bothered her, but she couldn't pinpoint what. "Sometimes people need to get lost to find themselves," she responded, thoughtful. Jake smiled, keeping to himself the secret he had discovered. He knew his sister well enough to know that she would distance herself if she discovered the true identity of the mysterious customer. And for the first time in a long time, he saw Emily lighter, almost happy. At the bakery, the conversations between Emily and Andrew deepened. He listened attentively to her stories about her studies, about the challenges of caring for her sick brother, about her dreams of becoming a nurse. In return, he shared reflections on life, purpose, and authenticity, always careful not to reveal details that could betray his true identity. One night, while she was telling him about a social project she had learned about in the neighborhood, Matthew realized it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the charade. It wasn't just guilt for lying about who he was, but a growing need to be truthful with someone who showed him so much sincerity. Autumn was coming to an end when Victoria Rothschild decided to reappear in the media. An exclusive interview for a celebrity magazine painted a moving portrait of the bride abandoned at the altar. The photos showed her elegant in her penthouse, her melancholic gaze perfectly calculated for the cameras. "Matthew was under a lot of pressure," she declared, her words carefully chosen. "The weight of managing an empire can sometimes be too much. I'm here waiting for his return, ready to start over." The report went viral instantly. On social media, public opinion began to change. The video of Matthew's collapse at the altar was now analyzed under a new perspective, no longer as a scandal, but as an act of courage from someone who refused to live a lie. Jake followed everything with redoubled attention. He observed the interactions between his sister and Andrew at the bakery, noting how the disguised businessman seemed increasingly genuine in his conversations. He was no longer the polished and artificial man from business magazines. His smiles were real, his words sincere. One afternoon, while Emily was at college, Jake had a stronger crisis. His blood pressure dropped drastically, and Martha had to call an ambulance. At the hospital during routine exams, a nurse commented that their health insurance had been upgraded to a higher category. "It was an anonymous donation," explained the employee. "It happened a few weeks ago. Now you have coverage for more specific treatments and high-cost medications." Martha looked at Jake, who feigned surprise. He knew exactly who was behind that gesture, but kept the secret. His loyalty wasn't just to protect Matthew's identity. It was also to preserve the purity of the relationship developing between him and his sister. At the bakery, Emily continued her routine, now with one less weight on her shoulders. The college tuition paid, better health insurance for Jake, small blessings that she attributed to some anonymous angel. In her conversations with Andrew, she found increasingly more comfort and complicity. "You know what's funny?" she commented. "One night while cleaning the counter, since I started working here, I've learned that the most interesting people appear after midnight. It's as if the early morning allows everyone to be more truthful." Matthew adjusted his fake glasses, feeling the weight of that observation. "And you? Do you also feel more truthful during the early morning?" "Maybe," she smiled, thoughtful. "Or maybe I've just found someone who really knows how to listen." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Betty, who came hurriedly from the kitchen. "Emily, phone, it's from the hospital, about your brother." Emily's face instantly paled. Matthew stood up, concerned, but she was already running to answer the phone. Minutes later, she returned, visibly shaken. "Jake had a crisis," she explained quickly, untying her apron. "I need to go to the hospital now." "I'll take you," Matthew offered without thinking. "You don't need to, Please," he insisted, his voice firmer. "This is not the time to save on transportation." On the way to the hospital, Emily was so worried about her brother that she hardly noticed when Matthew gave precise instructions to the driver without needing the address. She also didn't notice when he, upon arrival, moved through the hospital with the familiarity of someone who knew the place well. It was Jake who, upon seeing the mysterious customer from the bakery entering the hospital room next to his sister, exchanged with him a look of mutual understanding. A silent agreement was established at that moment. Some truths needed to wait for the right moment to be revealed. The incident at the hospital marked a subtle change in the relationship between Emily and Andrew. She began to notice small details that previously went unnoticed. The way he seemed to know every corridor of the hospital, how the staff looked at him with a mixture of recognition and discretion, how he managed to expedite procedures that would normally take hours. On an especially busy afternoon in the emergency room, while waiting for Jake's test results, Emily observed Andrew talking quietly with a doctor in the hallway. There was a naturalness in his bearing, a veiled authority that didn't match the image of the simple bakery customer. "You know this hospital well," she commented when he came back to sit beside her in the waiting room. Matthew adjusted his fake glasses, a gesture that had already become habitual. "Let's say I've spent a lot of time here," he answered cautiously. "I've learned that hospitals are places where social masks tend to fall." Emily nodded, thoughtful. "You know what's curious? Since you appeared at the bakery, inexplicable things have started to happen." The college tuition paid, Jake's health insurance improved, even some new equipment that the hospital mysteriously received. Matthew felt his heart accelerate, but maintained a neutral expression. "Sometimes the universe conspires in our favor," he said, trying to change the subject. "Or sometimes we have angels in disguise among us," she replied, her eyes fixed on him with a different intensity. The moment was interrupted by Martha's arrival, bringing coffee for everyone. Emily's grandmother had developed a special affection for Andrew, recognizing in him a genuine concern for her family. "The doctor said Jake can go home tomorrow," Martha informed, sitting with them. "It's amazing how the new treatment is making a difference." Emily observed the interaction between her grandmother and Andrew, noticing how he seemed perfectly at ease with that simplicity, as if there, in that public hospital waiting room, he had found something he had been looking for a long time. Meanwhile, in the room, Jake was browsing on his phone, following the latest news about Matthew Anderson. The press was speculating about major changes in his companies, significant donations to hospitals, investments in social projects, a complete restructuring of his businesses that no one could explain. His transformation began that night, Jake murmured to himself, remembering the story Emily had told about helping a stranger on the street. "And my sister doesn't even imagine that it was she who planted the seed." It was already past midnight when Emily finally managed to convince her grandmother to go home and rest. Andrew insisted on staying, claiming that he could work remotely the next day. "You don't have to do this," Emily said after Martha left. "You've already done so much for us." "I'm not doing anything beyond what any friend would do," he replied, and for the first time his voice trembled slightly on the word friend. Emily sat in the armchair next to him, fatigue finally manifesting after hours of concern. Without realizing it, she rested her head on Andrew's shoulder, her eyes heavy with sleep. "You know what's funny?" she murmured, already almost asleep. "You remind me of someone I helped once on a night like this, someone who also seemed to be looking for his true self." Matthew remained motionless, his heart beating strongly. Emily fell asleep before he could respond, but her words echoed in his mind throughout the early morning. The truth was increasingly close to coming to light, and he knew he needed to find a way to reveal it without breaking the trust he had earned. The news arrived like a tsunami on social media. Matthew Anderson had transferred control of his companies to an independent administrative board, allocating a large part of his resources to social projects. The decision caused furor in the financial market and revolt among his former partners. Victoria Rothschild gave a new interview, this time completely changing her discourse. "Matthew is clearly not in his right mind," she declared, her mask of understanding bride giving way to indignation. "Abandoning an empire built by generations? This is an insult to the memory of his family." At the bakery, the movement was particularly busy that night. Emily, divided between serving customers and following the news on her cell phone, felt an inexplicable connection to that story. The report showed old photos of Matthew Anderson at social events, always impeccable in his expensive suits, always smiling that smile that she now recognized as empty. Andrew didn't appear that night, nor the following one. His absence left a vacuum that Emily didn't expect to feel so intensely. The early mornings seemed longer, conversations with other customers more superficial. "Perhaps he had to travel," suggested Mrs. Betty, noticing Emily's restlessness. "That young man has something special in his eyes, you know, like someone who carries a beautiful secret." At home, Jake followed everything in silence. He saw when his sister, during a break at work, watched for the 10th time the video of the interrupted wedding. He observed how she paused the image at the exact moment when Matthew Anderson said, "There's no love here. There never was." "You miss him, don't you?" Jake asked one night while Emily was organizing her college books. "Who?" "Andrew. The way he listened to you, as if every word of yours was important." Emily stopped what she was doing, a sigh escaping from her lips. "Sometimes, I have the feeling that I've known him for much longer, as if you had already met before," Jake completed, a significant gleam in his eyes. Before Emily could respond, her cell phone vibrated with a message. It was from the hospital where she volunteered. An emergency. They needed support. She got ready quickly. The conversation with Jake momentarily forgotten. At the hospital, the emergency was a case of exhaustion. A man had fainted during an important meeting. Emily entered the designated room, her hands already occupied with equipment to check vital signs. Her heart almost stopped when she saw who was in the bed. There, without the fake glasses, without the discreet cap, without the carefully constructed disguise, was Matthew Anderson, or Andrew, or whoever he really was. He slowly opened his eyes, focusing on her face. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence in the room was dense, loaded with untold truths and mutual recognitions. "I knew I would find you here," he finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "The universe has a peculiar sense of humor, don't you think?" Emily remained motionless, her hands still holding the blood pressure monitor. Thousands of thoughts crossed her mind. Every conversation at the bakery, every mysterious helping gesture, every moment when she felt there was something familiar about that special customer. Emily felt the weight of the silence in the hospital room. Her hands trembled slightly as she performed the routine procedures, avoiding meeting Matthew's eyes. Each professional gesture was an attempt to delay the inevitable confrontation with the truth that was now wide open before her. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice low but firm. "Why all this pretense?" Matthew adjusted himself in the bed, feeling the fragility of the moment. "Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me as a person, not as a bank account or a business title. That night when you helped me without knowing who I was, something changed inside me. So you decided to play ordinary person, do a social experiment with my family." The hurt escaped through her contained words. "No," he protested, trying to sit up. "Emily, I needed to understand what it was like to be truthful, what it was like to build real connections. Every moment at the bakery, every conversation, every laugh, it was all genuine." Emily finished noting the vital signs on the chart, her hands now firmer than her heart. "The anonymous donations, Jake's health insurance, college, was it all you?" Matthew nodded slowly. "I didn't do it out of charity or pity. I did it because for the first time in my life, I understood the real value of money. Not to buy status or power, but to make a difference in the lives of people who deserve a chance." "And now? What happens now that your disguise has fallen?" she asked, finally meeting his eyes. "That depends on you," he answered softly. "But before you decide anything, I need you to know the whole truth." Matthew then began to tell about the changes he had been implementing in his companies. How each conversation with Emily at the bakery had inspired a new social initiative. A support center for families with sick children, inspired by Jake's story. Scholarships for nursing students who worked to support their families. Professional training programs for people in vulnerable situations. "Each project was born from something I learned from you," he explained. "Your strength, your dignity, your ability to see beauty, even in the most difficult nights. You taught me more about humanity than all my years of privileged education." Emily sat in the chair next to the bed, absorbing every word. She remembered all the times Andrew had asked specific questions about neighborhood problems, about the difficulties her college colleagues faced, about the needs of the hospital. "Jake knew, didn't he?" she asked, a sudden understanding emerging. Matthew smiled slightly. "Your brother is very perceptive. He recognized me early in the visits to the bakery, but he understood what I was trying to do. He kept the secret not for me, but for you." A light knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Martha, who had been called by the hospital. The lady paused at the entrance to the room, her wise eyes alternating between her granddaughter and Matthew. "So finally the masks have fallen," she commented with a serene smile. "You know, my boy, sometimes we need to completely lose ourselves to truly find ourselves." Emily looked at her grandmother, surprised. "You knew too?" "I didn't know who he was specifically," Martha answered, approaching, "but I recognized in him something I've seen many times in life, someone looking for their true north. And I saw how you two were transforming, one through the other." Matthew felt tears forming in his eyes. "Mrs. Parker, I'm sorry for having lied." You lied about your name and your position, she gently interrupted him. But you were truthful in everything that really mattered. I saw how you looked at my granddaughter, how you cared about Jake, how you respected our simplicity. That can't be faked. The days that followed were of deep reflection for Emily. The bakery seemed strangely empty without Andrew's visits, even knowing now who he really was. News about the transformations in Matthew Anderson's companies gained increasing prominence, with experts trying to understand the sudden change of direction of one of the country's largest conglomerates. On a particularly busy morning at the hospital, Emily found an envelope in her locker in the changing room. Inside was a key and an address, along with a handwritten note. I'd like you to see something important when you're ready. M.A. After her shift, driven by a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, Emily followed the indicated address. It was a simple building in the central region, different from what she would imagine as Matthew Anderson's property. Using the key, she entered a room on the ground floor and was paralyzed by what she saw. The walls were covered with architectural projects, photographs, and documents. In the center, a large model showed what appeared to be an integrated health complex. On one of the panels, she recognized her own face. It was a photo of her attending to a patient during her internship, completely absorbed in her work. It's the project I'm most proud of so far, Matthew's voice sounded behind her. He was standing at the door, without disguises, wearing simple but elegant clothes. What is all this? Emily asked, still processing the visual information around her. It's the Future Community Health Institute, he explained, approaching cautiously. A center that will integrate quality medical care, professional training, and research, all aimed at communities that would normally not have access to these resources. Emily slowly walked around the room, observing every detail. There were studies on the health needs of the region, proposals for partnerships with universities, scholarship programs for students like her. Why are you showing me this? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Because every aspect of this project was inspired by what I learned from you, Matthew replied, maintaining a respectful distance. The way you balance empathy and professionalism, how you see beyond appearances, how you transform difficulties into motivation. You taught me that true wealth is in making a difference in people's lives. Emily stopped in front of a board, showing the project's timeline. And what do you expect from me? Nothing, he replied promptly. I'm not showing this to impress you or to redeem myself. I just want you to know that that night, when you extended your hand to a stranger on the street, it wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the beginning of a much larger transformation. The silence that followed was interrupted by Emily's cell phone. It was Jake asking where she was. The message brought her back to reality, reminding her of all the responsibilities and complexities of her life. I need to go, she said, moving towards the door. Emily, Matthew called softly. I know I broke your trust with my disguise, but everything we experienced at the bakery, every conversation, every moment, it was the first time in my life that I could truly be myself. She stopped at the door without turning around. And who are you really, Matthew? Andrew or someone in between? I'm someone under construction, he answered honestly. Someone who is learning that life is not made of titles or bank accounts, but of true moments and real people. And that I learned from you. The return to the bakery routine was more difficult than Emily had imagined. Each customer who entered seemed to bring with them the memory of the long conversations with Andrew. The cups of coffee served carried the weight of exchanged confidences, shared smiles, half-truths. You need to give him a chance to explain himself properly, Jake insisted during breakfast. Matthew may have hidden who he was, but he never pretended what he felt. Emily stirred her coffee distractedly, avoiding her brother's gaze. It's not that simple, Jake. He built an entire parallel life, a complete character. And have you never wondered why? Martha intervened, sitting with them at the table. Why would a man with all the money and power in the world choose to spend his early mornings in a simple bakery, talking to a nursing student? The question hung in the air, heavy with meanings. Emily remembered all the times she noticed genuine vulnerability in Andrew's eyes, how he seemed truly interested in her stories about college, patience, the small victories and frustrations of daily life. Emily's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Matthew. "The Institute needs a consultation on the structure of the emergency wing. I'd like to hear your experience if you're willing. Just professionally." She stared at the screen for long minutes. Jake, peering over her shoulder, smiled. "He's trying, Em, in his own way, but he's trying." "What if it's just another role he's playing?" she questioned, more to herself than to her brother. "Darling," Martha called softly, "sometimes people need to wear masks not to deceive others, but to protect themselves while finding the courage to be themselves." At college, Emily discovered that the Community Health Institute was already a topic of discussion among professors and students. The project was revolutionizing the way public healthcare was thought about in the region. Some of her colleagues had already been selected for paid internship programs at the new institution. During a practical class, her community nursing professor called her aside. "Emily, you know the creator of the institute, don't you?" "Matthew? Anderson has been personally participating in planning meetings, and I heard him mention your name several times." Emily felt her face heat up. "We know each other superficially," she replied evasively. "Well, superficial or not, he clearly values your perspective. The entire project seems to have been conceived from the reality of students and professionals like you, people who understand in practice the challenges of public health." That night after her shift at the bakery, Emily found a new envelope in her locker. Inside there was just an old photo, Matthew still a teenager, next to a lady in a white coat in a hospital corridor. On the back of the photo, a message. "My mother, before she passed away. She was a nurse like you. She was the last person who really saw me as I was, until I found you that night." Emily sat in the empty changing room, the photo trembling in her hands. She remembered all the times Andrew had demonstrated surprising knowledge about hospital procedures, how his eyes shone when she talked about her shifts, how he seemed genuinely moved to see patients being discharged. Her cell phone vibrated. Again, another message from Matthew. "I'm not asking you to forgive me or to understand. I just wanted you to know that, of all the versions I've been forced to be in life, the truest was the one you met during the early mornings at the bakery." In the next room, Jake smiled as he followed the latest news about the Institute. Matthew's former partners were furious with the changes, threatening lawsuits and retaliation. But for each criticism, dozens of positive stories emerged. Benefited families, students with new opportunities, professionals fulfilling dreams that seemed impossible. "Sometimes," thought Jake, "you need to lose everything you have to find. Everything you are." Emily's decision to visit the Institute wasn't easy. She spent hours mentally rehearsing what she would say, how she would behave, how she would maintain the professional distance she had imposed since discovering Matthew's true identity. But her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes, masks protect hearts under reconstruction. The Institute building impressed not by luxury, but by functionality. Each space had been designed to optimize patient care and comfort. At the reception, an elderly lady was animatedly commenting with her daughter about how she had never been treated with such dignity in a health service. "Miss Parker," a receptionist called her. "Mr. Anderson is waiting in the meeting room on the second floor." In the elevator, Emily took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. The walls displayed photographs of health professionals in action. Not posed or artificial photos, but real moments of care and dedication. In one of them, she recognized Mrs. Betty from the bakery, smiling while receiving care. Matthew was waiting for her in a simple room without ostentation. He wore a basic dress shirt and jeans, a middle ground between the Andrew from the bakery and the Matthew Anderson from business magazines. His smile was hesitant, almost shy. "Thank you for coming," he said, indicating a chair. "I promise it will be strictly professional." Emily nodded, sitting down. On the table, detailed plans of the emergency wing awaited her analysis. For almost 2 hours, they discussed care flows, equipment layout, specific needs of nursing teams. Matthew noted each observation with genuine attention. "You really understand hospitals," she commented at one point, remembering the photo he had shared. "I grew up in the corridors of the hospital where my mother worked," he replied, his gaze distant for a moment. She always said that a hospital is not made of walls and equipment, but of people who care. I lost sight of that for a long time, chasing numbers and status. Emily observed how his hands trembled slightly when talking about his mother. It was the same tremor she had noticed so many times in Andrew's hands during their conversations at the bakery. "Why did you choose that bakery?" she suddenly asked. "Of all the places you could hide." Matthew smiled, a genuine smile that she knew well. "I didn't choose the bakery. I chose to return to the place where someone, for the first time in years, saw me as a person, not as net worth." The silence that followed was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. A group of executives abruptly entered the room, led by Victoria Rothschild. Her eyes flashed upon seeing Emily. "So this is why you went crazy," Victoria fired, her tone loaded with disdain. "You traded everything we built for this?" Matthew calmly stood up. "Victoria, this is a private meeting about technical aspects of the Institute. If you want to discuss business, schedule an appointment with my staff." "Business?" she laughed bitterly. "You're destroying business, throwing away an empire because of a humanitarian outbreak inspired by a waitress." Emily stood up as well, her voice surprisingly firm. "Nurse. I'm a nurse, graduating in 3 months. And unlike you, Mrs. Rothschild, some people build empires not of money but of transformed lives." Emily's words echoed through the meeting room, leaving a dense silence in the air. Victoria Rothschild paled, her perfectly made-up eyes narrowing, in contained fury. The executives accompanying her exchanged uncomfortable glances. "You have no idea." "What's at stake here, girl?" Victoria hissed, regaining her composure. "Matthew is throwing away generations of work because of a moment of weakness." "Weakness?" Matthew intervened, his voice calm but firm. "For the first time in my life, I'm being strong enough to be who I really am, Victoria, to honor the legacy that really matters." Emily began to collect her notes about the emergency wing, feeling that she should leave. That dispute wasn't hers. That world wasn't hers. But before she could reach the door, Victoria's voice stopped her. "You want to know the truth about your common people's Prince Charming?" she provoked, taking an envelope from her designer purse. "Here is the real Matthew Anderson." The envelope contained photos, dozens of them. Matthew at luxurious parties, on yachts, at charity events, where the real objective was to display jewelry and designer clothes. In each image, he smiled that artificial smile that Emily now recognized so well. "This is you," Victoria continued, spreading the photos on the table. "The real Matthew Anderson, not this social benefactor farce you're trying to play." Emily looked at the photographs, but instead of shock or disappointment, she felt a wave of even greater understanding. In each image, through the rehearsed smile and the perfect pose, she saw the same emptiness she had found that night on the sidewalk. "You're wrong," Emily said softly, surprising everyone. "These photos don't show the real Matthew. They show someone who spent his entire life trying to be what others expected of him." Matthew looked at her with intensity, his eyes shining with contained emotion. Victoria laughed, a cold and calculated sound. "And you think you know him after a few conversations in a corner bakery?" "No," Emily replied, maintaining her calm. "I met someone who, for the first time, had the courage to be vulnerable, to show his doubts, to admit that he was lost. And you know what's most interesting, Mrs. Rothschild? It was precisely when he had nothing to display that he showed his greatest value." Jake, who had silently arrived at the door of the room during the discussion, smiled upon hearing his sister's words. He was holding a folder with documents, the results of his latest exams showing significant improvement thanks to the new treatment he had gotten through the Institute. "Gentlemen," Matthew addressed the executives, his demeanor serene. "As I've already formally communicated, the changes in the direction of the companies are irrevocable. The Institute is not a whim or a phase. It's the realization of a purpose I should have discovered a long time ago." Victoria advanced, furious. "You'll regret this, Matthew. When the board knows—" "The board already knows," Jake interrupted, entering the room. "In fact, they're quite impressed with the Institute's results. The social responsibility actions have increased the value of the companies by 30% in the last quarter." Everyone turned to the young man, surprised. Jake continued, his voice firm despite his age. "Oh, and that report you were planning to release trying to discredit the institute? I think journalists would be much more interested in knowing how the former board was overcharging for hospital equipment contracts." Victoria paled even more, her gaze alternating between Jake and Matthew. "How did you—" "Let's say that spending so much time in hospitals taught me to pay attention to details," Jake answered with a serene smile, "including the absurd prices of basic equipment that, curiously, always came from companies in your family, Mrs. Rothschild." Victoria left the room like a hurricane, leaving behind only the echo of her expensive heels on the hospital floor and a trail of imported perfume. The executives followed her hurriedly, murmuring embarrassed apologies. The silence that established itself was different now, lighter, like the air after a storm. "How did you discover all this?" Emily asked her brother, still processing what had happened. Jake smiled, sitting carefully in one of the chairs. "When you spend so much time in hospitals, you end up meeting people, hearing stories. Some older nurses told me about the overcharging schemes. I just needed to put the pieces together." Matthew looked at the young man with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "You are truly extraordinary, Jake, but you shouldn't have gotten involved in this. Victoria can be dangerous when contradicted." "More dangerous is letting people like her continue manipulating the health system as if it were a monopoly game," Jake replied, with a maturity that surprised everyone. "Besides, I owed this to both of you." Emily frowned. "To both of us?" "Yes," Jake continued, his eyes shining with wisdom beyond his years. "You, Em, have always been my hero. Sacrificed everything to take care of me, never complained, never gave up. And you, Matthew, when you could simply have returned to your luxury life after that night, chose the most difficult path, that of truth." Matthew approached the window, observing the movement of the hospital down below. Patients coming and going, family members waiting for news, health professionals in their tireless routine of care. "You know what's ironic?" he commented, his voice soft. "I spent years building a financial empire, but I never felt as rich as during the early mornings in that bakery, talking about dreams and fears with a nursing student." Emily felt her heart accelerate. She approached him, observing the same scene through the window. "And I never felt as wealthy as when I could help a stranger on a sidewalk without expecting anything in return." Jake observed the interaction between the two with a discreet smile. He got up silently, heading for the door. "Well, I think you have a lot to talk about, and I have a physical therapy session not to miss." Before leaving, he turned once more. "Oh, and Matthew, that coffee with toast that you liked so much at the bakery, Mrs. Betty taught me the recipe. We could try to make it one of these days at our place." When the door closed behind Jake, Emily and Matthew found themselves alone again. The silence between them was loaded with unspoken words, with feelings that had grown during the early mornings at the bakery and survived the revelation of the masks. "Emily," Matthew began, his voice trembling slightly, "I know I don't have the right to ask anything, but—" "Shh," she gently interrupted him. "Sometimes we don't need to ask for anything. Sometimes we just need to be brave enough to be who we really are." Outside, the city continued its frantic rhythm, but inside that room, two people who had met on a night of vulnerability discovered that sometimes the truest new beginnings are born when all masks fall. The following weeks brought significant changes in everyone's lives. The Community Health Institute grew not only in structure, but mainly in social impact. Emily, now officially involved as a consultant for the project, balanced her last months of college with work that really made sense. On a Saturday afternoon, while organizing her final presentation for the graduation committee, she received an unexpected visit at the bakery. Mrs. Betty came running from the kitchen, her eyes shining with emotion. "Emily, you need to see this," exclaimed the lady, dragging her to the small television that was in the corner of the establishment. On the screen, Matthew was giving an interview for a Sunday program, but it wasn't the Matthew from the old reports with his impeccable suit and rehearsed smile. It was a serene man, dressed with elegant simplicity, speaking passionately about social transformation. "True success is not in the numbers of a bank account," he was saying to the interviewer. It's in the smiles of patients who receive dignified treatment. It's in the hope of students who can follow their dreams. It's in the dignity returned to people. The interviewer, clearly intrigued, asked about the drastic change in his life. Some say it was a nervous breakdown. Others talk about an existential crisis. What really happened at that wedding, Mr. Anderson? Matthew smiled, a smile that Emily knew well, the same one she saw during the early mornings at the bakery. What happened was that I finally understood what my mother tried to teach me throughout her life as a nurse. That our value is not in what we possess, but in what we can do for others. The camera focused on an old photograph, the same one that Matthew had shared with Emily, of him as a teenager next to his mother in the hospital. This photo was taken on the last day I worked as a volunteer at the hospital where she worked. After that, I got lost in empty ambitions, in appearances, in a world that confuses price with value. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. Mrs. Betty, who was watching attentively by her side, squeezed her hand affectionately. "And what made you find your way again?" asked the interviewer. "An act of kindness," Matthew responded simply. "Someone who, without knowing who I was, without expecting anything in return, extended their hand to me when I was at my most vulnerable moment. This person taught me that true wealth is in simple gestures, in the courage to be authentic, in the ability to see beyond appearances." At the bakery, other customers approached the television, attracted by the story. Some commented on the changes that the Institute had brought to the neighborhood, about how medical care had improved, about the opportunities that were emerging for young people in the region. "He didn't mention your name," observed Mrs. Betty quietly, "but we all know who his guardian angel is." Emily discreetly wiped away a tear. "It wasn't me who saved him, Mrs. Betty. That night we saved each other. I just reminded him of who he really was, and he showed me that our dreams, however simple they may seem, have the power to transform realities." The interview continued, with Matthew detailing the Institute's projects, the scholarship programs for medical and nursing students, the partnerships with public universities. In each word, in each gesture, Emily recognized neither the millionaire Matthew Anderson nor the mysterious customer Andrew, but the man who had found his true essence on the path between these two extremes. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Jake. "See, sometimes modern fairy tales don't need castles or carriages. Sometimes they happen in corner bakeries, with simple cups of coffee and honest hearts." The week of Emily's graduation arrived, bringing with it a special energy. The Parker family's small apartment was in a commotion with the preparations. Martha was sewing some adjustments to the gown they had managed to borrow, while Jake organized a special surprise for his sister. "Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" asked Matthew, who had discreetly arrived to help with the preparations. "Absolutely," Jake replied, smiling as he arranged some old photos on a mural. Em is so focused on her final presentation that she barely notices what's happening around her. The photographs told a story of perseverance, Emily as a child, taking care of her little brother, her first days of work at the bakery, moments of study into the early morning, her first experiences during internship. And now new images were joining the collection, her guiding the Institute's team, presenting projects, making the difference she had always dreamed of. "You transformed her life as much as she transformed yours," commented Martha, observing. Matthew helped Jake with the decoration. "Mrs. Parker," he replied with humility, "your granddaughter taught me the real meaning of wealth. Before her I had everything money could buy, but I was completely empty." The lady smiled, her experienced hands continuing the work on the gown. "You know what impresses me most about you, my son? It's not what you did with your money or your influence. It's how you chose to start from scratch, sitting in that bakery night after night, relearning to be human." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of keys at the door. Emily was arriving. Quickly, Matthew said goodbye, leaving through the back as they had arranged. The surprise needed to wait for the right moment. "How was the last orientation?" asked Jake, disguising the previous agitation. Emily dropped onto the sofa, exhausted, but happy. "It was amazing. You won't believe the theme I chose for my final presentation." "Tell us, dear," encouraged Martha, hurriedly hiding the gown. The humanization of healthcare. How small gestures can transform lives, Emily announced, her eyes shining. I'm going to use the Institute as a case study, showing how a project that was born from a moment of genuine empathy is revolutionizing the way we think about public care. Jake and Martha exchanged knowing looks. If Emily knew that at that exact moment, dozens of professionals from the Institute, benefited patients, and her former colleagues from the bakery were organizing a surprise for her graduation. You know what's most amazing? Continued Emily, lost in her thoughts. It all started with such a simple gesture, helping someone on the street, offering a little water, a moment of listening. And look at what it's turned into, completed Jake, observing through the window the sunset that was tinting the sky with golden hues. Sometimes a single drop of kindness can cause waves of transformation that we can't even imagine. Emily hugged her brother, noticing how he was stronger, healthier, thanks to the new treatment. She looked at her grandmother, who even tired maintained that serene smile of someone who knew that everything was heading exactly as it should. Tomorrow is the big day, she whispered, feeling the weight of that achievement. It wasn't just a graduation. It was the culmination of a journey that had transformed not only her life, but that of so many other people. The university auditorium was packed on graduation day. Emily, adjusting the borrowed gown that had mysteriously been perfectly fitted to her body, took a deep breath before going up on stage for her final presentation. In the front row, Jake and Martha smiled encouragingly. The humanization of health. Care is not just a theoretical concept, she began, her voice firm despite the nervousness. It's a silent revolution that happens in each gesture of care, in each look of understanding, in each moment when we choose to see the human being beyond the patient. As she developed her presentation, the back door of the auditorium opened silently. Matthew entered discreetly, accompanied by Mrs. Betty and several employees from the bakery. Behind them, patients from the Institute, some in wheelchairs, others supported by canes, all there to witness that moment. The case of the Community Health Institute shows us that profound transformations can begin with simple gestures, Emily continued, without noticing the movement at the back of the auditorium. A project that was born from the understanding that health is not a privilege, it's a right, and that this right is realized not only through state-of-the-art equipment, but mainly through professionals who have not lost their ability to be moved by another's pain. In the audience, an elderly lady was discreetly wiping away tears. She was one of the first patients benefited by the Institute, who now worked as a volunteer welcoming other patients. By her side, a group of scholarship students from the project watched attentively, recognizing in Emily the same determination that motivated them to follow their dreams. But what really makes the difference? Emily asked, her eyes shining with emotion. Is it the big investments, the modern equipment, the new buildings? Yes, all of that is important, but the real differential is in something much simpler and at the same time much more valuable. It's in our capacity to be humans caring for humans. She paused, taking a sip of water. That's when her eyes finally scanned the entire auditorium and she saw, in the last rows, dozens of familiar faces. Patients she had attended to, colleagues from the bakery, employees from the Institute, and among them Matthew, without disguises, his eyes brimming with pride. A few months ago, she continued, her voice breaking slightly, I learned the most important lesson of my future profession. It wasn't in anatomy books, nor in procedure classes. It was on an ordinary night when I chose to stop to help someone who seemed to need just a little water and attention. A murmur of recognition ran through the auditorium. The story of the encounter that had originated the Institute was already known by many, although few knew that the nursing student in the story was Emily. What happened after that night is a powerful reminder of how small gestures can generate waves of transformation. The Institute is not just a health center. It's living proof that when we choose to act with humanity, even in the smallest actions, we can trigger changes that affect generations. At the end of the presentation, The auditorium exploded in applause. Jake was the first to stand, followed by everyone present. Emily saw her grandmother openly crying, Mrs. Betty waving enthusiastically, the institute patients applauding with emotion. The examining board barely needed to deliberate. Besides the impeccable presentation, the real impact of Emily's work was visible on the faces of all those people who had come to honor her. When they announced her approval with the highest grade, the auditorium again exploded in celebration. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. While Emily was receiving congratulations from the professors, Jake went up on stage with a microphone, a mischievous smile on his young face. Jake adjusted the microphone, his young but confident voice echoing through the auditorium. Everyone knows my sister as the exemplary student, the dedicated professional we just saw shine on this stage. But today I want to tell a different story. Emily looked at her brother, confused. At the back of the auditorium, Matthew advanced a few steps, while Mrs. Betty discreetly distributed small envelopes among those present. A few months ago, Jake continued, on a cold night, a young worker was returning home after another exhausting shift. She was tired, worried about bills, about college, about her sick brother's treatment. But even so, she stopped to help a stranger who seemed to have lost everything. The auditorium fell into complete silence. Emily felt her legs tremble, realizing what was about to come. What my sister didn't know was that that moment of spontaneous kindness would plant the seed of something much bigger. That stranger wasn't just another man in difficulty. He was someone who had lost himself and, through her kindness, found his way back. Matthew was now closer to the stage, his eyes fixed on Emily. Mrs. Betty gave a signal, and one by one those present began to open their envelopes. From inside, they took out small LED flashlights. But this is not just a story about how my sister helped someone, Jake continued. It's a story about how a single act of kindness can illuminate paths we didn't even imagine existed. The lights of the auditorium softly dimmed. One by one, the small flashlights began to light up, creating an ocean of luminous points in the darkness. Each light you see represents a life touched by what began that night, Jake explained, his voice choked with emotion. Patients who regained dignity, students who fulfilled their dreams, professionals who rediscovered their vocation. Emily covered her mouth with her hands, tears freely running down her face. Matthew finally went up on stage, stopping next to Jake. Emily, he spoke, his voice echoing through the silent auditorium. You gave me back much more than dignity that night. You reminded me of who I really was, who I could be, and look at what your gesture created. He gestured to the illuminated audience. Each person standing held their flashlight and a card with a personal message, stories of how the Institute had transformed their lives. The real miracle, Matthew continued, wasn't the creation of the Institute or the lives we managed to help. The miracle was a young student, overwhelmed with her own problems, choosing to stop and extend a hand to a stranger. It was you choosing to see humanity where others would see just another lost case. Martha went up on stage, bringing with her an old box. From inside, she took out the simple note that Emily had left with Matthew that night. Hope tomorrow is a better day. Stay strong. This note, Matthew spoke, holding the paper with reverence, is framed in my office. It's my daily reminder that the greatest transformations begin with the simplest gestures. Jake smiled, taking the microphone back. And now, sis, it's our turn to give back a little of what you taught us. The lights came on, revealing a huge banner. Welcome to your new home, Dr. Emily, Director of Humanization at the Community Health Institute. Emily looked incredulously at Matthew, who was smiling gently. The Institute needs someone who never forgets its essence, he explained. Someone who knows that sometimes all a patient needs is a little water and an attentive ear. A year passed since Emily's graduation. The Community Health Institute had transformed into a model of humanized care, receiving visitors from all over the country interested in replicating its methodology. But for Emily, the most special place was still the small bakery where it all began. On a particular night, she organized a special meeting there after business hours. Mrs. Betty had prepared the coffee exactly as in the old days, and the familiar aroma filled the environment, decorated with simple flowers and candles. "Are you sure you're not overdoing it?" asked Jake, helping to arrange the tables. His face was healthy, radiant. The treatment had been a complete success. "Absolutely," Emily replied, adjusting a small vase of daisies. "This place is a fundamental part of our story." Gradually, the guests began to arrive. First Martha, carrying a mysterious box. Then some patients who had become close friends, institute employees, colleagues from her college days. Finally, Matthew entered, looking nervous despite his serene smile. "Good evening, everyone," Emily began, her voice soft but firm. "I called you here today because this place has a special meaning for each of us. It was here that many stories, intertwined, that destinies were transformed." She paused, looking around. Each face present carried a part of the journey they had shared. A year ago, at that emotional graduation, I received an incredible gift, the opportunity to continue making a difference in people's lives through the Institute. But today, I want to share something even more special. Emily gave a signal, and Jake brought a large covered panel. When the fabric was removed, everyone saw photos that told an extraordinary story. The first encounter on the sidewalk, the early mornings at the bakery, moments at the hospital, the graduation, celebrations at the Institute. "This panel will permanently remain in the Institute's lobby," she explained, "not to tell my story or Matthew's, but to remind everyone who enters there that the greatest transformations begin with the simplest gestures." Matthew approached, his eyes shining with emotion, and that sometimes we need to completely lose ourselves to find our true path. "But there's more," Emily continued, making a gesture to Martha. Her grandmother opened the mysterious box, revealing the old apron that Emily used to wear at the bakery, framed along with the first note she had left for Matthew. "This apron will stay here at the bakery," she announced, "because it was here, between cups of coffee and conversations into the early morning, that we learned our most valuable lesson, that true wealth is not measured by bank accounts, but by transformed lives." Jake smiled, observing the glow in his sister's eyes and the way Matthew looked at her, a mixture of admiration, respect, and something deeper, which had naturally grown throughout that year of working together. "And now," Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to announce our next major initiative, the training program in health humanization, which will take the Institute's methodology to other institutions, starting with 10 public hospitals in the region." The news was received with enthusiastic applause. Matthew then took the floor, his voice loaded with emotion. "But we are not here just to celebrate professional achievements," he said, turning to Emily. "We are here because in this simple place, between these walls that witnessed so many stories, I discovered the true meaning of wealth. And it's here that I want to ask you a question." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Matthew took from his pocket not a velvet box with a luxurious ring, as everyone expected, but the same crumpled paper that Emily had given him on that fateful night, now carefully preserved. "Emily," he began, his voice breaking, "when you gave me this note, it wasn't just water and a car that you were offering. It was humanity, it was hope, it was the chance to start over. Today I want to give back to you not just a request, but a promise." He carefully unfolded the paper, revealing that he had written something on the back. "May we continue building better days together, with all the strength in the world." "I'm not offering you a fairy tale or a life of luxury," Matthew continued. "I'm offering you a partnership, in life, in work, in dreams. I'm asking you to continue transforming lives together, as equals, as it has been since that first night." Emily took the paper with trembling hands, recognizing her own handwriting on one side and the sincere promise on the other. Silent tears ran down her face, while a smile illuminated her eyes. "Yes," she answered simply. "Yes, to all the better. Days we'll build together." The bakery exploded in applause and hugs. Mrs. Betty ran to the kitchen and returned with a special batch of bread, "just like the ones he asked for every night," she commented, smiling through tears. Jake hugged his sister tightly, whispering in her ear, "See, Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the darkest nights. Martha observed the scene with misty eyes, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Her granddaughter had not only achieved her professional dreams, but had found someone who valued her exactly for what she was: her strength, her kindness, her ability to see the best in people. The institute continued to grow, but maintained its essence. At the entrance, the panel with the story of that encounter on the sidewalk reminded everyone who entered that the greatest transformations begin with small gestures of humanity. At the bakery, the framed apron silently told a story of love that was born between cups of coffee and sincere conversations. Emily and Matthew maintained their simple routines, living in a comfortable but not ostentatious apartment near the institute. Every Wednesday, religiously, they had dinner at Martha's house with Jake, keeping alive the family bonds that had been the foundation of that entire story. And on Emily's desk, in her office at the institute, two objects occupied a prominent place: the original note from that night and a simple cup from the bakery.